welcome to Note Doctors. My name is Paul.
My name is Jen.
My name is Ben.
And we are your hosts. We are all university music theory instructors who are passionate about music theory and music theory instruction. In this podcast, we will be talking about all things theory with some of the best music theory teachers in the country. If you want to know more about music theory and the most effective and innovative ways to teach it, this is the podcast for you.
Hello, Note Doctors listeners. Today's guest is Dr. John Mortensen. Paul, why don't you tell us a little bit more about John?
John Mortensen is a leader in the international revival of historic keyboard improvisation. He improvises complete concerts in historic styles. He is a Fulbright Global Scholar in Historic Improvisation, a Steinway artist, and now serves as professor of piano at Cedarville University in Ohio. This is such a fun conversation for especially Jen and I, because we actually had Dr. Mortensen as a professor, and his insights are just really, really great.
They are tremendous. And it was like a flashback to our undergraduate days. And we both took a class with him that the students affectionately called Funky Boards, but the real name of the class was Functional Keyboard Skills. So anyway, Dr. John Mortensen is wonderful, and it's a great chat that we have.
The thing is, though, is the more options you give, the more everybody screws up and gets lost. And so pedagogically, one is constantly saying, whoa. Let's stay within what you can do really well. Okay, let's only build up as high as it's stable. Okay, so, and if it starts wobbling like this, probably something down low is not really square. You know, the bricks are not actually in there. So let's go back down there and let's sand that and make sure it really fits. So that actually pedagogically is more of a priority than telling them all these amazing super tricks. More important just to say, actually your RO sucks, and you have to go back and review that. That's usually what the case is.
So today, our very special guest is, in fact, a little bit even more special today. It's Dr. John Mortensen. As our listeners probably don't know, Jen and I went to the same undergraduate university, and while we were there, we actually had Dr. Mortensen as our professor, and he was my piano professor, and full disclosure, I was a pretty mediocre piano student, and so if we slip into calling you Dr. Mortensen, that's just that's reverting back to our student selves. And so we wanted to start, though, by talking about historic improvisation, because that's what you're here to talk with us about, and you have a book about it. So tell us a little bit about what is that, how is that different than just improvisation or jazz improvisation, and then how did you get started into that? You're a concert pianist, so did you just wake up one morning saying, I'm tired of memorizing Chopin, let's do something else? How does that happen?
Well, thanks for inviting me, and it's great to talk to you guys and to meet Ben for the first time. For me, it really did come out of a sense of malaise. I remember sitting down and, like most pianists, you sort of design programs. And I came to a point where I was trying to list things I wanted to play, and I love that music, and I will always play that music, but the sameness of it all struck me. And at one point, I heard somebody say something about 1 million pianists all over the world all playing the same 100 compositions for the last 100 years. And I just felt this heaviness about the stasis of the whole performing culture versus like the dynamism of other types of music, of jazz and pop music and rock and roll. Is constantly changing, and it's interesting, and it's always new. And to go and hear the Beethoven Pathetique Sonata yet again, it's a great piece. It's worth hearing. Absolutely nothing new is going to happen. Absolutely nothing. I don't care. Somebody says, I have this new interpretation. Oh, fine. You held the fermata on page 3 for like one more second, and this changes the world. Anyway. So I started to feel the sameness of classical piano performing culture. And I had been studying jazz and actually playing occasionally with a trio and then adding jazz pieces to concert programs. Not, just somebody's arrangement of Gershwin, but actually learning to improvise over changes on the fly. And in that process, it started to occur to me that there was not necessarily any insurmountable barrier between what I was doing with jazz and potentially, playing classical music in the same way. So that kind of started me, and the entry point was variation form, where you have an established looping chord progression, right? And so what I started to do, I was using Handel, the Chaconne in G major, HWV 435, and I would sneak in a few improvised variations and not tell anybody, because they don't know the music, they don't know anything, they're just audience people. But and I would just see how it goes. Like, can I actually get away with this? But I won't tell anybody because that's dangerous. Once I felt okay doing it, I would then tell them I was going to do it and say, but I won't say when, and you have to try to guess. And I would see if I could blend it in,
Yeah.
And then from there, I'm like, well, why can't I just do the whole Chaconne? What's stopping me? Once that started to work, I said, okay, let's really swan dive into this. What if you're going to play toccatas? What about a French overture? What about dance suite? What about the big one is fugue? And so it's several years of work into it. I came upon a whole tradition that I didn't know about and began studying it, and that paid back. So to me, there are implications for musicianship and theory and musicology. All that stuff comes out of it. But actually, all I was trying to do was find something interesting to do in concert. That's all I was doing. And anyhow, here we are.
So in the intro to your book, you say that our sort of traditional music education is actually not traditional enough because composers before this would have been trained in improvisation. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, the name that you probably know is Robert Yerdigan, who wrote Music in the Galant Style, and then his new book is Child Composers in the Old Conservatories. And Yerdigan gives great perspective on this. He says the modern theory course, 2 years of theory, 2 years of oral skills, is really a dilettante kind of liberal arts dip your toe in music approach, where you don't have time to learn the musicianship from the older Neapolitan school. So instead of learning music, you're just going to learn about music. And the illustration he uses is taking an astronomy class. You're not really going to space. You're just going to read stories about space. And so he says, Roman numerals and harmony, these are all just stories for amateurs about counterpoint, but they're not actually going to do it. Now that is overstated a little because Roman numeral based modern theory is not just dilettante. It's not just to learn about it so you're informed. There's some practical applications for sure. But I do now look at it that way, that it's too abstract. It doesn't really tell you the truth about how most of those musicians were thinking. It superimposes root motion on a lot of music that was not thinking in terms of root motion. Roman numerals and root motion and inversion, which is totally alien to the 18th century. Only starts filtering in the very early 19th century, and so it kind of gives people a wrong picture of how to think about certain types of music. Root motion and inversion in particular is death to improvising in an 18th century style, because if you have to think in terms of root motion, most chords are inverted, right? I mean, just go through a score. How many of them are 5/3 versus something else, 6/4/3 and 6/5 and stuff? So if you have to think in terms of root motion, you are constantly uninverting a bunch of harmonies to try to figure out what the root is. So like, wait, that's in the bass, but that's not the important note. So the real secret root is hidden right in the middle of the guts of the chord. Okay, now that I know what that root is, now I can think about its harmonic function. Well, it's too late. The music just died and stopped. And so thinking in terms of root motion actually is paralysis. So one of the first things we do in historic improvisation to learn to play an 18th century style is learn a different way of thinking about the bass and the associated harmonies that are going on above it. And you have to know Roman numerals, you have to understand roots, but we kind of leave them aside the more advanced we get.
Yeah, it's always interesting to tell your theory students that after they've learned Roman numerals, to tell them that Bach didn't have Roman numerals.
Yeah.
They didn't even exist
Yeah.
in an analytical sense until much later.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting how we lock into that
Yeah.
and try to use that kind of later analytical tool for something that's just not appropriate at all.
Yeah, and actually, it slows everything down. Like it makes it really hard, and it doesn't have that much of a payoff. Certainly not for playing continuo or performing or improvising. There's no payoff for thinking in terms of Roman numerals.
So the question is, what do you think about? In your book, you talk about rule of the octave, and that's certainly something that's more baseline driven than chords.
Yeah.
And so, and that seems to be an entry point, at least, into a way that you can start to improvise in this style.
Exactly. It really is built around bass motion. And the idea there is that, and the way that the Neapolitan tradition worked, what I call the Partimento tradition, is that they would start with rule of the octave so that they always had a default harmonization. So no matter what the bass did, if you don't have anything cooler to do, you can at least do RO and it will sound like real music and you'll pass the test. So you can quickly accompany an aria, or you can quickly set up a concerto movement or whatever you need to do, just RO and you're done. By the way, I was in Lithuania last year and I was at the National Academy and I went to a concert and someone played one of these super virtuoso pieces by Sarasate, one of these like faux Paganini things. And it was good, that's great conservatory. But, and I started laughing in the back row because the accompaniment was entirely rule of the octave. Beginning to end, every single thing, it was just like so off the shelf, out of a can. I just thought, you could write this in like 4 minutes. Anyway, so the first thing is you learn ascending and descending scales, and RO, major and minor, and the different versions. Then typically the teachers will start and they'll say, okay, that's one thing you can do if the scale is in the bass. Here are some other things. So 5/6 for ascending, 7/6 for descending, 8/7/6, 10/9/8. So these other scale harmonizations, chromatic motions, which ascending is usually built around 5/6, descending is built around 7/6, and then the moti, the sequential patterns, and so if you take down a third, up a step, which I refer to as cascade because it's like little cascading waterfalls. They have about 10 different solutions for cascade in the Neapolitan tradition, 10 harmonic solutions for that. And depending on who's teaching and what era and so on, you can round up about 10. And so students would study these, they would sing them, they would play them in Partimento, they would write them into their pieces, they'd be singing them in the choir or wherever they were working, they'd be playing continuo, and they just absorb this stuff. Now the beauty of the system is that when you see something on paper like a cascade in the bass, if you've studied, you immediately know 10 solutions to this, and most of them involve contrapuntal variations where the upper voices are invertible. So it's actually way more. So it gives you I sort of go out on a limb and I say you actually have a comprehensive knowledge of the harmonic and contrapuntal language of the era. Pretty much everything that can happen can be explained in the terms of the Partimento tradition. There's really no harmonic moves you can do that Partimento doesn't prepare you for. So everything that happens, you can immediately hear it and say, oh yeah, I know what that is. So your aural skills just go through the roof. It goes crazy. Because you've already played it. You've already played it in multiple keys. You've inverted the voices. You've harmonized in a different way. You've transposed, blah, blah, blah. So that's really what it's based on. And in most cases, it's not really necessary or helpful to pin this thing to a dissection board and pull its guts apart and say what the root actually is. You just don't need it. doesn't really serve any purpose. So that's why root motion is so alien to the Partimento tradition.
Now, as you talk about all of these, the 10 different options of harmonizing these bass lines and all of these kind of categories and these different figurations, it seems to be it could be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that you mentioned in your book is this zibaldoni, which is kind of a way of kind of categorizing or compiling all of these different possibilities. And I found it so interesting because you have your students do it. You have your own zibaldoni, and you have your students use it or create their own. And so talk about what that is. It's not something to smooth ice on a rink. And how it's been useful for you as like a pedagogical tool for your students.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a pedagogical tool. It could be used for really anything. The fact that the word is historic, it's just an old notebook, personal notebook, what they might call a commonplace book you carry with you, and when something interesting happens, you write it down. So a merchant might have one, or a shipbuilder who's down at the dock might be like, oh, look how they rigged that, and you draw a picture of it. And so it's just for a musician. The reason I think it's pedagogically cool is because, one, after you do it for a while, you accumulate a lot of these things, and you can peruse them, go back through. Oh yeah, remember that time I heard this cool passage? You can share them with other people. You can say, hey man, what did you find? Let me show you what I found. But most of all, by having to write by hand, you are forced into sustained interaction with the material that I don't get if I'm just take a picture of it and put it in a file. It just forces me to slow down and draw ledger lines and draw stems and really think about what this is, and so it stays in my memory. So yeah, it's really just the pedagogy of it that I like. There's nothing magical about the fact that it's just a notebook, So yeah, I have a couple volumes going on now, and they're not in any particular order. It's just I start a section when I find something cool. For example, the other day I was reading Yertigan, and there were these really bodacious canonic solutions. That is a good word that I insist on. The bass motion was, I think it was going up a scale, and one of the harmonic solutions is 8-7-6. So you have an upper voice that starts with an octave, the bass moves up, and now that upper voice is a seventh. It has to resolve to a sixth, and then it jumps to get another octave, and then the bass moves. So you have these constant 8-7-6, 8-7-6, and then 10-9-8 works the same way. Well, Stanislaw Matai, one of the Partimento teachers, he had this solution where the upper voices were trading who does the dissonances, and they were canonic. There's these beautiful canonic structures in the upper voices, and I thought that's really cool. And I looked at it for a while, and I thought, I bet you anything they would do the same thing for 7-6 descending. I'm going, in my little zibaldoni, I'm going to figure out how to do it, and I'm going to record it as a prediction that I will eventually find this in some history, like in a piece. Because if an idiot like me, if it occurs to me, and I barely understand Italian music, well, some 11-year-old kid from Naples definitely figured it out. So I have, that's one thing of my zibaldoni. It's like it says prediction, canonic 7-6 thing, and I'm just keeping it there until the day I find this passage in music. So that's the purpose of the zibaldoni.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And speaking of 11-year-old child, what are your thoughts on, once students get to our institutions, is it too late at that point, or what should we do at that point? Because we have, 18, 19-year-olds coming in, and sometimes later on even in life, which is great, and sometimes earlier. We have Texas Academy of Math and Science at UNT, and we have students in music for that now. They're even younger.
Yeah, well,
so
sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think, most of us who are in this profession, if we stay and survive, it's because we're relentlessly hopeful people. And we love to watch people get it, and whatever level they're on, we love it. And so the fact that somebody's behind is not necessarily the worst disaster, because it's fun to help them catch up. So on the one hand, I'm very optimistic, and I'm totally ready to help anybody get up to speed. I mean, I flunked my piano audition to University of Michigan when I was 18, so just goes to show you something. Yeah, I just did a conference session with the University of Michigan. It was so fun because I got to tell embarrassing stories about all these faculty that I used to be afraid of, and have it go out like on an official U of M platform. It was so fun. Anyway, so I'm very hopeful. On the other hand, I'm super well aware of how rough the music profession is, and how delusional young people are about their own potential to fit into it. So I'm pretty rough on them. Just yesterday, I had a student who was playing something that shall remain nameless, and had a 2 against 3 in it. And last week, the kid couldn't play a 2 against 3. And I said, if I couldn't play a 2 against 3 in a lesson, I'd be super embarrassed. Every professional can play 2 against 3, either hand. We all understand it. We all use it all the time. I don't ever want to hear you not able to play a 2 against 3. So the kid comes back next week, can't play 2 against 3. And I said, you have no future in the profession if you don't take this stuff seriously. So I'm really, really hard on them about not coasting along in the comfortable little cocoon of undergrad. And, Paul and Jen, Cedarville's a really comfortable place. Frankly, most undergraduate places are, because they're filled with similarly ignorant people who reinforce each other. And so the faculty's job is to say, this is fun for these 4 years, but actually once you get out of here, the wind is cold and rough, and it's going to blow right in your face, and you are not ready. So yeah, I try to be I'm pretty blunt, actually, about...
Yeah, part of the reason I asked is because the night before we recorded this, I was just looking at a way to see if we could integrate some kind of improvisation, not necessarily keyboard improvisation, I know that's your specialty, into every class period. That way, at least you're coming back to it, and you're not just doing one improvisation and then just leaving it go for weeks on end, because you just can't acquire, I think, the skills without coming back to it. Almost every class period, whether it's just 5 minutes or something, I think it can really be beneficial. So I'm with you that it's not lost, that we can still acquire those skills, but it does require a lot of daily routine type activity.
Absolutely daily, built into the fabric of life. And one of the reasons that you find so little that is specifically written about improvisation from the 18th century is because improv was a side benefit of their larger musicianship curriculum. They didn't really have to teach improvisation. They didn't have to find 5 minutes for it at the end of a class, because when you're doing solfeggio and Partimento, you are interacting directly with how music actually works. You're not reciting it off a page. You are creating it. You're transposing it. You're inverting it. You're just doing all this stuff. They were composing. They had to play continuo. Okay, so when you play continuo, you are reconstructing the music from nothing in a way that you're not when you're just reading notation. So they constantly had to do this. And then there were little keyboard things, little preluding styles and other things that just forced them into practical job training improvisation. Like they had to, or they wouldn't get a hamburger to eat that night. So you don't need like 10 easy tricks, try this neat trick in improv. You don't need that, because they already know, like, you're not going to eat if you can't do this. So we can't really replace that today in our curriculum. There's really no way to replace that. And I don't know the answer. One of the questions you guys had listed in the emails preparing for this was, what about the current changes in music theory, where we're trying to consider non-Western, not a bunch of dead white guys, people, minorities and people of color and marginalized groups and all that. Yeah, I'm all for that in terms of like respecting their cultures and justice. But the problem that we face is that the more inclusive and broad you get, the less you can actually get any good at anything. And all you do is you get a class that's about music. And so you learn a little bit about music, but you don't actually learn to do anything. And you simply can't be good at funk and disco and, South African chant, ritual, and Chinese this, and improvising. You have to choose. You just cannot do it all. And the classes that do are just going to be kind of fun National Geographic documentary classes. You're going to see it, but you're not really going to go there. So that's the conundrum that we face is there's pressures on both sides to go in opposite directions. And there's good reasons for both of them. So I don't see a single solution for that.
The thing with improvisation is that there's this, you have to own it. And I think that's the struggle with, having like a survey class where you're kind of bopping around the world. You don't really kind of own anything in the end. You kind of know your mind is broadened but you don't own it. And improvisation requires you to own something really deeply. It's not really a question. It's just it's an observation. And because of the zibaldoni, where you're kind of writing things down, you are taking ownership and encouraging your students, regardless of, I guess, whatever profession they're going to, but having this seriousness and discipline to really own it and go out, because it's not an easy place to succeed right now with music.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right.
It's very true.
And so I hope I don't ever say anybody can do this and it's easy. It's costly. It's so costly and time consuming, and it's slow. The hopeful thing is that for anyone who wants to put time into it, they can get from here to here and then here to here and here to here. So on my little online group, online school, we have about 300 people there, and there are retirees who are amateurs, and there are conservatory students, there are conservatory faculty from names of schools that you would know. There's a 10-year-old kid from India who's learning rule of the octave, So everybody's at these wildly different places, just wildly different. But over time, they all make progress. They all move forward. But that's the key, is that it's not 5 minutes in a class and then a quiz and then you're done. It's consistent, and that's really what it takes.
Right.
Yeah. You mentioned at the beginning that jazz sort of took you toward this path. Is there transfer there between jazz improvisation and this type of improvisation?
A lot.
Do they connect?
Yeah, they do. They're a nice Venn diagram that has some good overlap. One of the things that jazz did for me, I was playing a concert, and I think I was going to do a lot of Scarlatti sonatas, like maybe 6, which is, as my kid would say, that's a buttload of Scarlatti. And so I played a buttload of Scarlatti, and it was fine. I mean, I was ready, I knew it, and I played it. But, I just felt like, okay, every note, get it exactly right. There's one way through this music. Do the next correct thing. So I played it, and it was fine, and but I just felt that narrowness of it. And then the second half of the concert, I improvised everything, and it was jazz standards, I think. And I just remember thinking, at every moment, I can branch out. I could go this way, I could go that way. I could play silence, I could play noise, and I felt what I call this rhizomic feeling of the branching out possibilities. And I thought, that is the real difference. The linear versus rhizomic, where the correct way through the canonic standard repertoire thing, there's one way. There's one way. Everything else is a derailment, is a disaster. And when you improvise, you're constantly choosing this branching. And that's what classical and historic improvisation, or jazz and historic improvisation, have in common, is developing this idea of being rhizomic, which, particularly for pianists, by the way, this linear thing is so embedded because pianists memorize massive amounts of music. And they almost don't realize what they're doing to their brain is optimizing it for the linear recall. So you tell them, make a choice, and they just go, I can't. And so the book is built around giving people some really, really easy branching pathways. There's A and there's B. Both of them are great. Both of them are right. You won't get hurt. Just walk up to that fork in the road and then do it. Because I'm aware of just how like almost neurologically hard it can be for players to do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people hit a wall when they first start improvising. I mean, they think that they're going to walk up and make this beautiful improvisation, and if it's not, then they're horrible at improvisation. And it makes me think about when I first improvised in middle school. Like, we had jazz band, and our jazz band director would make every single person improvise. But the requirement for the first improv was that you could only play one note. So it was a very safe way of kind of introducing improvisation. In fact, you didn't even have to change pitch. So I thought that was really nice, and it made me kind of embrace it a lot more.
You just pretend you're a bongo drum player. Just keep hitting that one note. I mean, most of us can, tap out a fun rhythm. That's a great pedagogical tool. Limiting the vocabulary and just making them use rhythm. Yeah, it's actually a great idea.
Yeah, and that limited kind of progression, I guess you start with in the book, is that page one progression, the 1 2 4 2 5 6 5 1 from the Bach's Prelude in C. Talk to us why you chose that progression as an entry point and how you use that in your own teaching this type of improvisation.
Yeah, the page one. Interestingly, it shows up just everywhere. There's a podcast called Reply All, which has nothing to do with music. It's about internet culture, and it's a very techno, highly produced, but it's there. It's their theme song. Very interesting. The reason I used it is because one, I wanted to give a satisfying, interesting little harmonic activity that works in various positions of the soprano and works in major and minor, and you can learn it in 24 keys, just to start giving people something that they could now transpose and use in a whole bunch of ways. And one of the things I would make people do is come back next week and have this in every position, in every key. 24 keys. Well, it's pretty shocking if you've never done anything like that before. It's absolutely a shock to the system. But by the time you're done, you know how it works, and you start noticing voice leading. Inner voice. Oh, the inner voice always wants to do that. Okay, cool. I never had to think about that before, because I could always just read it off the page and not think about it. Then it's very useful because you can have infinite variations on it and use it to start an improvisation, because it's a great opener. So Bach and Beethoven, the Hallelujah from Christ on the Mount of Olives, Mozart K503, on and on. There's thousands of instances of it. So then they start recognizing it in music they know, and they go, oh, cool, I know what that is. Well, that makes people happy, and now they want to learn more, and so that's good pedagogy. So it's just to start giving them a feeling of what it's like really to know how music works, just with 4 chords. How different is the experience from being an on-page musician to starting to learn to be an off-page musician?
Yeah. And when you have an improvisation, do you have certain key areas that you have in mind? So obviously there are certain keys that you're more likely to choose. I remember being an undergrad student and studying counterpoint and trying to, I think, modulate to like the flat 2 or something, trying to write in like an 18th sentence. And it was just atrocious and terrible. Like, this isn't working out. And I didn't understand why. Well, obviously, do you have kind of these little markers that you're planning? Or
for myself,
how do you
for myself, I do it less and less because I've just played a million improvisation concerts, and it's just very comfortable to go wherever. So I sort of don't really, for myself, that's one of the things I worry about least, is where am I going to end up harmonically. But that's after having thought about it and wrestled with it a lot. So in teaching, yes, the main thing I would teach is, first of all, for absolute beginners, if you're in major, you got to get to the dominant and back to make a little piece, right? There's almost no music that just stays in the home key. You got to at least say hello to the dominant, and once you do, you high five the dominant, then you can go home. And so we work on that, and what are the different ways, if we use a descending sequence, we look for the scale mutation. And again, it's not about root motion, actually. It's more about scale mutation. But for more advanced players, I would start to introduce the idea of the 5 closely related keys. So that's the relative plus everything with one more or less accidental, and that adds up to 5 keys. So I just did a video yesterday, for example. I had a question from a student on Improv Planet about, from rule of the octave, like how when you're just going up and down in RO, how do you get out of there to other places? So I just went through major and minor RO and showed all these different ways of getting to all the related keys. And then after that, there are certain really bold things, like Handel might do this in a arpeggiated fantasia. He might show just how crazy he can get with these audacious moves. Or there's a great one by Padre Martini, where the motion is, it has to start on 1, obviously, but he gets to a 4/2 with a tritone, and the bass is falling chromatically, and it's alternating 4/2s and fully diminished and falling chromatically. So that motion I just called the Martini, right? And so it's always the same. It's totally sequential, so it doesn't really force you toward any key center. You can go as far as you want. Yeah, and then you can resolve. You can, how you can get out of a diminished any old way you want. So those, for people who want to really go nuts and go to distant key areas, that's a good one. You can just do like a cadenza with falling diminished chords, like a organ cadenza. You of course can use C5, circle of fifths, either diatonically or chromatically with perfect fifths, and get off that merry-go-round at any station. Get off that stuff you guys all know. The thing is, though, is the more options you give, the more everybody screws up and gets lost. And so pedagogically, one is constantly saying, whoa. Let's stay within what you can do really well. Okay, let's only build up as high as is stable. Okay, so, and if it starts wobbling like this, probably something down low is not really square. The bricks are not actually in there. So let's go back down there and let's sand that and make sure it really fits. So that actually pedagogically is more of a priority than telling them all these amazing super tricks.
Sure.
More important just to say, actually your RO sucks, and you have to go back and review that. That's usually what the case is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You can't walk before you run. I was playing around with some of the sequences in the book, and I ended up being in a place where I'm not even sure where I was, and I was no longer kind of operating under common practice harmonic rules anymore. When you started improvising in this style, did you ever find yourself doing things that were historically anachronistic, I suppose? Certainly not adding a major seventh. Well, actually, Bach does add a lot of major sevenths to his things. But were there ever times where you kind of found yourself falling out of the kind of historical musical style?
Oh, yeah, sure. Because I speak languages that didn't exist in the time of the 18th century that are native to me, and so I default into those languages very quickly. The biggest one is unprepared dissonances. And again, when you are an on-page musician and your music making consists of reciting things that are on the page, you can play very beautifully, and maybe one's professor even got you to be really concerned about tied notes and hearing the ties and things that the piano needs. But you don't really know why, from the perspective of someone who creates the music, that those dissonances, prepared and resolved correctly, are like the driving engine of the sound of the 18th century. I like to think of them as love potions. They're powerful, but they're dangerous if misused. And the quickest way, you can be playing something and it's all like really nice 18th century. Here's a little prelude, da 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 da. All you have to do is hit an unprepared seventh not on the dominant, because that was kind of in discussion, but like a minor 7 chord, like a 4 chord with a minor 7th that's on. All you have to do that, and it's like, boom, early Debussy. Instantly. It's like putting the wrong ingredient in your food, and instantly it tastes like something else. So, that's a huge deal, especially, I didn't grow up in the 18th century. This is not native to me. So I have to think about how to sound, and I have to listen to a lot of stuff. On the other hand, the beauty of the Partimento system is that when you study it, it builds in the voice leading from the beginning. So what I like to say is, the reason I don't accidentally tie my shoes together in the morning is because I don't practice tying my shoes together in the morning. It's just not a part of what I ever practiced. I always tie them separately, So I'd never inadvertently tied my shoes together and then tried, oh no, not again. Why would you do that? Like the pianist Shura Tchaikovsky used to say, I don't play that many wrong notes in concerts because I don't practice wrong notes. They're just not a part of it. And so what Partimento does is it forms habits of voice leading that you then default to and draw upon when you're playing. And so actually, I mean, one of the biggest surprises to me of this whole good, wonderful adventure has been how rarely I play real stinker voice leading mistakes in concert. I do it occasionally. I've caught myself like, oh crap, that was parallel octaves. But almost never, just because I don't tie my shoes together. I don't practice parallel octaves. I don't practice parallel fifths. So they're not in here waiting to get out.
Yeah.
So it's actually less. That is not at all the biggest issue in this. Everyone thinks it is. Like, how do you keep from doing it? Because I did my theory paper and I had red ink because my tenor and my alto were. Ugh. And how do you manage? Your mind must be a supercomputer. It's not like that at all. I don't accidentally start speaking Mandarin when I'm having a casual conversation because I don't ever practice that. I don't stumble into it. So anyway, that actually is probably the least of one's problems.
Have you ever been performing improvisation and it's gone awry? It's gone badly?
Yeah,
'cause that's
sure.
the fear, right? That's what people are afraid of.
I've felt like something was a dud a few times, and then I hear the playback and I'm like, I don't love it, but actually, it's almost never terrible. Really, I've been very, very surprised because I've felt stupid and felt at a loss. And usually when that happens, one defaults to some emergency thing that you just know how to do. And actually, they work surprisingly well. They sound like normal music, and it sounds like nothing's wrong. So I've been surprised a number of times about that. The biggest problem, if you really want to play a lot in public and improvise, the problem is just loading your mind with enough different ideas so that you don't just start sounding the same. When I was initially figuring out how this worked, I went out to Eastman to a wonderful summer institute that was run by my friend John Andrew Sleminski, who's currently at Linfield College in Oregon. I've kept in touch with him a little bit. He's a brilliant guy. I think he's the youngest guy ever to get a DMA from Eastman or something like that. Anyway, he's this genius boy. And he was improvising in a kind of gallant style, doing these sonatas. And he was telling me about his strategies. I said, so dude, how many of these do you play until they start sounding the same? And he said, well, not that many. Because I have these strategies that I keep relying on. And I can vary it, but after, a handful of sonatas, you're going to start to see my template. You're gonna see my template. Mm-hmm. So that's the real challenge: is you have to keep reloading your mind with new ideas. And usually I do that in a like, okay, what's an overture? How do you do an overture? Well, it's the slow part with all these tiradas and dotted rhythms and energy and drama and stuff. and then there's a fast kind of quasi-fugue thing in the middle, usually in compound meter of some kind, and then it recapitulates. So it's a little ABA thing. All right, let's practice a bunch of tiradas and dotted rhythms and things like that. Now let's practice some fugue stuff. Now let's play 10 overtures. Okay, I think I just about wore that out, and now the 11th one sounds a lot like these others. So okay, back to the piano and start thinking about something else. So that's actually the challenge is we always sound like ourselves. Like we always do, no matter what. I got this friend in LA. He's a really good musician. He's a jazz pianist. And he says, I thought I've had good and bad days recording, but actually I hear it later and I just always sound like me. So we always sound like ourselves, but the challenge is to have at least a little variety in and growth over time in what it means to sound like ourselves and not just stay within this comfortable little thing.
Yeah. Well, this is so fascinating, and we could certainly talk for a lot longer about this, but we promised that we would have you done within an hour or so. So we're going to wrap up, but first we have some rapid fire questions. So these are questions I actually did not give you. All right, so these are just off the cuff. All right, you don't have to defend them at all. Okay, so just your hot takes on these. So I'll start, and this is probably coming from my baggage as a pianist. This question: should pianists, especially college students, be expected to memorize an entire recital's worth of music?
Because most of them, only the ones that are going to a grad school in performance actually have to be great memorizers. Everybody else is going to teach and accompany and do the rest of this. Memorization is not going to play that big of a role in their lives. They're better off playing more music, more variety with less anxiety. Oh, that's great. More variety, less anxiety.
Oh,
I love it.
Hear, hear.
That's so good. All right. So just as we've been talking, I've heard so many things that I'm like, that transfers directly to the theory classroom. So most of our listeners are music theory nerds like we are. What is one thing from all of this work that you've done that you think is a perfect transfer? What should we be teaching in theory 2 or 3 or whatever that would help with this skill?
Go from whatever 80% paperwork or whatever to like 20% paperwork. Play and sing and improvise in class. If I could run everything, secondary piano class and theory and oral skills would be one giant, like 7 or 10 credit thing. That would be more than half of it would be just making music in class. So today we're doing scales. So we're going to sing a scale. And then you guys improvise by finding thirds and sixths above each moving note of that. Okay? Now we go to minor, thirds and sixths. Okay? Now we have parallel tenths and somebody else find these intervals. And okay, now bring in your instrument and we're going to play divisions on the ground. And now we're going to do this. Because I just have this sneaking suspicion, including from my own life, that theory students retain a tiny, tiny fraction of what they do analytically on paper. I just don't think it works. I don't think theory class works.
That's a hot take.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had that sneaking suspicion myself. I'm always looking for ways to make it practical and to make it better. That's part of the reason why we're doing this. It's been one of the best parts of 2020 has been these conversations about how to be better at what we do every day.
Yeah, every day. I don't think it's, next year we're going to come back and say, now we figured it out. You know, I think it's going to be a process that always requires refining all the way down to the foundation, like you mentioned earlier. So kind of piggybacking on that, my question was going to be, when we're in our curricular redos and we're polishing and we're inserting all these new and great things, what is something that we need to take out? In your opinion, what is the number one most important thing that we need to not have in order to kind of open up space to do other things?
4th semester serialism and set theory. Total waste of time for today's musician. If they want to learn about it, they have time in their life later, but it's ugly, weird horror movie music that most people hate. And why would you even want to know what a set was if you can't even hear and identify a circle of fifths? Like, why? So there's my take.
There you go.
Yeah, and I mean the circle of fifths
Didn't even
isn't just
hesitate.
the circle of fifths isn't just a classical music thing. It shows up in all kinds of music, pop music, jazz. I mean everything they're gonna do.
Yeah.
That's a critical one. So yeah.
Totally.
Awesome. So as we wrap up, can you just let us know, let our listeners know what your projects are? You know, you have this new book, or I guess it's within the past year, right?
Yeah,
Is
it's
that this
from. I
come
think
out?
it came out in May.
Yeah. So the Pianist's Guide to Historic Improvisation. So what else are you working on? And not that writing a book isn't enough. And where can people find you? You mentioned a little bit about your YouTube channel and also your website. So how can people reach out to you if they want to learn more about this?
Just through my website, johnmortensen.com. Everything else I do is kind of linked to from there. Most recent projects, I actually I'm releasing an album in a couple of days. I'm just doing it digitally because, again, CDs are dead. And these are all live, unedited concert improvisations from the last couple of years in US and Europe. So actually super easy to do, you know, you just upload things and hit release and you're done. So anyway, that'll be out on, I think the only way to get it is streaming services. I'm working on another book. I'm wrestling with what it's really about. The idea is, I really wanted to do a comprehensive approach to how to improvise fugue. Like what you actually have to go through practically to be able to do this in front of people and not sound like an idiot. Like what do you have to do? So the ramp up to that is Partimento and bass motions. But then I'm maybe thinking of expanding it into just like concert improvisations. What do you have to know to get polished enough where you can actually walk out on stage and survive? So that's in process. It's a very, very deep dive into Partimento and how I teach it and how I work on it myself. I did a little in Pianist's Guide. I'm getting a lot of requests for people who want to know what about improvising in romantic style. So I'm just kicking around what that would really mean when style becomes super individualistic. Like Chopin is Chopin, Schubert is Schubert. There's no mistaking. What does it mean to improvise even in that style? We're working on developing an international festival in Denmark, probably going to start in the summer of 2022. And it will be a teaching festival with live concerts and faculty from US and Europe, in cooperation with a wonderful student of mine in Aarhus, Denmark. Residency at University of British Columbia coming up, and then I don't know, some other stuff. So that's probably enough.
Stay busy. So that's our show. Thank you so much for listening to Note Doctors, the music theory and pedagogy podcast. We will be back with more interviews with professors and teachers who will be dropping all sorts of theory knowledge for your education, edification, and enjoyment. So until then, bye-bye.